Hello, everyone. I'm Philip M. Bailey, political writer here at the Courier Journal, with my colleagues Joe Sonka and Morgan Watkins here to do a post autopsy on the election results that have now officially come in. Now that we know who is going to be the candidate running against Senator Mitch McConnell in the 2020 Senate race, that will be retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel Amy McGrath, a former fighter pilot. She won the nomination yesterday against State Representative Charles Booker in a not so expected but close primary contest where she beat Representative Booker by about 2 to 3 percentage points. Morgan, let me start with you. We're obviously weren't supposed to be here. I mean, Charles Booker was not someone who was thought of as a serious contender against her even 2 months ago, but he clearly closed that gap. One thing I'm noticing is that there's a lot of letdown naturally amongst Booker supporters. Is McGrath able, in your view, to reconcile that and unify the Democratic base, or is she going to have some trouble doing that?
I don't know. We'll see. I think that she's in a good position in the sense that Mitch McConnell for Democrats, especially for the kinds of further left, kind of more progressive voters that kind of flocked to Booker.
Mhm.
For them, Mitch McConnell is a big villain, in national and Kentucky politics. So I think in that sense, she probably is pretty likely to be able to get a lot of people who maybe are in the same position they are. It's kind of the same position you see a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters in, where they kind of know Joe Biden, the more moderate candidate, is going to be the nominee, and they're not big fans of it. But for the most part, a lot of them are saying, well, he's not my candidate, but I'm not going to not vote for him when the other person is someone I detest, like Trump. That's what a lot of them think. And I think in that sense, you'll see that with McConnell as well. I'm sure plenty of voters who wanted Booker to go and be the nominee are still going to say, well, I'd still rather have McGrath than McConnell, and they'll line up behind her. But at the same time, this was a really passionate kind of race, especially, Booker supporters. A lot of them were really passionate about his candidacy. I went to one of his campaign events in the final week before the primary. And I mean, the people that I talked to there and the people who were there, you could just tell how excited and fired up they were about his campaign. So you may have some people who say, you know what, no, they may feel maybe not motivated to get out for her, or at least not motivated to stump for her the way they might have been motivated to really hit the ground for him.
Joe, I've never in Kentucky, right? I've never had people call me crying about the candidate losing. You and I've been there for Martin v. Conway. We've seen some nasty Democratic primaries, but I don't remember the losing side. I don't remember Adam Edenland's supporters calling me crying when he didn't win the primary against Andy Beshear or Rocky Atkins for that matter. People were calling me yesterday like weeping like babies about Charles Booker. Um, and I get why that is, because Representative Booker touched something that I don't think we've seen before. I don't know if you agree with that, but is it possible for Amy McGrath to get these people back? I mean, I can't imagine, for example, Amy McGrath being able to even go to a Black Lives Matter protest in Louisville and speak, right? Like,
yeah, I probably saw more passion in this primary than, and if we're talking about both parties, than since 2010 Rand Paul.
well, yeah.
Where you go to every Rand Paul event and you're like, where are all these people coming from? But yeah, there was a lot of passion behind Booker's campaign, and it was really just a crescendo, just increasing this past month until up until election day and post-election day. But I don't know. And if you look at Booker's concession statement, it kind of signals how difficult this is going to be, because he, it was kind of pointed. It was like, it shows you don't have to act like a Republican to win.
Still criticizing her. It was
still didn't use her name, but you knew who he was talking about.
Right.
But he did concede the race, and now I think it all depends on what steps Booker takes going forward. Is he going to go out on the campaign trail with McGrath? Is he just going to say, I concede the race and I'm voting for McGrath? I hope you do too. Leaves it at that.
Mike Breuer, in his concession, endorses McGrath and says, "Hey, what's it called? Breuer Brigade.
Yep.
Get behind Amy McGrath." I did not hear Charles Booker say to his people, now let's all get out here and vote against Mitch McConnell. It was, I love you, Kentucky. I'm always going to be with you, in some way, shape, or form. That was, and the timing too. Like, he waited until after Governor Beshear's press conference, which didn't allow Beshear to really say, Beshear's praising Booker. I think it was quite strategic, to be quite honest. I think McGrath is going to eventually be able to pick up most of those Booker supporters in some way, shape, or form. But I'll tell you all this. After the results came in, I talked to a few of Senator McConnell's confidants and people who've been with him, alumni of his campaign for years, who were quite pleased. I mean, not because they thought that they would lose to Charles Booker, but they understood that if Booker was the nominee, they would be facing a movement. They would be facing people all over the state who were really energized. I think that's the issue, is that you don't have someone who is going to immediately get this sort of fervor amongst Kentuckians, right? Like, it's going to be, go ahead.
I think he was very much an unknown, and because Mitch McConnell's never run against a candidate like Charles Booker. Like, Amy McGrath is somewhat similar to Allison Lundgren Grimes, somewhat similar to.
And that was Booker's argument, right? I mean, yeah. Mitch McConnell's run against a Democrat with money, Bruce Lunsford. He's run against a popular person within the Democratic Party infrastructure who also has money, Allison Lundgren Grimes. Mm-hmm. Booker's argument was he's never run against the movement. And you're already seeing, I see an editorial today by Jennifer Rubin in the Washington Post saying Democrats made the right choice. They voted with their heads instead of their hearts voting for McGrath. But then I saw an editorial in the Independent from a Black columnist saying Kentucky Democrats turned their back on this Black millennial who was trying to show them the future. So I think that debate's going to continue even after this primary.
Well, and McGrath may benefit on the Democratic side. There could be a benefit from the fact that this is a presidential election year. If this was an off year without a presidential race, then Democrats not being fired up, or at least farther left, more progressive Democrats not necessarily being fired up for McGrath or still being upset about Booker's loss, they may not necessarily all be motivated to show up and vote, if unless there's another race on the ballot they care about. But with the presidential race on the ballot, I think that you can guarantee that a lot of those, or at least there's a good chance that a lot of those voters are going to want to turn out no matter what to vote against Trump. And as a result, if they're already sitting there with a ballot in their hand, even if they're not a big fan of McGrath, they may just go ahead and mark the box for her too. Because, hey, if I'm already, so I was talking to someone who was talking about a political science professor who was talking about that with McConnell's side, that McConnell, may, unless, Trump's approval ratings plummet and the economy continues to crash and things like that, that he likely will benefit from the fact that it is a presidential year. So even if a lot of Kentucky Republicans aren't super stoked about him as a candidate necessarily, they're still going to show up to vote in the presidential race and mark the boxes for the GOP down the ballot. So she may benefit from that.
Right. And I think another thing that McGrath is probably happy to see is that even in the primary results on the Republican side, Trump has more votes than McConnell. There is a gap of some sort between the president and his support. Both of them basically ran uncontested races, but definitely President Trump did here in Kentucky. Let me ask, I guess, to move forward in this conversation, let's look at, Morgan, you and I wrote a story today about Senator McConnell and his sort of tried and true playbook here. All of us have had a chance to see Senator McConnell run and re-elect, which is based upon two pillars. What I can do for Kentucky, and this other person is terrible, right? Like dragging that person through the mud, right? And ask Allison Lundgren Grimes, ask Bruce Lunsford, ask anyone who's running against McConnell. I mean, he knows how to do that quite effectively. What does that look? I mean, I just think that this race is going to be such a standard race in terms of that McConnell strategy. And that I don't know if the McGrath narrative has broken that yet. Like Allison Grimes ran on, Mitch McConnell doesn't care. Bruce Lunsford ran on the same thing. Oh, he doesn't care. He only cares about himself and these rich people he helps. That was what Mike Ward told us in our story today on CourierJournal.com. I'm just wondering, is there a breaking in the fever on that this year because of COVID, or are people, has a Democrat, either one of you can answer this, has a Democrat been able to, or can they break this notion that Mitch McConnell is the best person to be in the room for Kentucky?
I don't know.
We'll see.
All right there.
Let me say it's a difficult task as we've seen in past elections. It's McConnell's never been an extremely popular figure in Kentucky, but he always manages to make the person he's running against just drag their name in the dirt. So most people, dislike, if not hate, that person, and that's what tens of millions of dollars in attack ads can do. That's
what can they do, right?
what
Like,
they're for.
not only is this person terrible, but if you elect them, they can't get, like, he makes it as if they can't get anything done, right? Like, and we're going to see like we see every time, we're going to see every big check, every big piece of dollar that Kentucky got from the CARES Act, he's going to emphasize that. It doesn't matter if it's for a little small drug program, a big hospital, you're going to see every CARES Act check touted out for the next 5 months.
Well, and I do think in that sense, the McConnell campaign is recognizes that COVID-19 and the pandemic is sort of a completely unique situation. It's obviously having a negative economic effect, but also the health effects. So you do see, I think, there could be an opening there to make more of an argument saying, look at, all these especially bad kind of dire straits Kentucky's in right now and Kentuckians across the state are in right now. But you do see the McConnell campaign kind of getting out in front of that by highlighting, they've already been highlighting, and that's going to continue. The senator said that on Friday when he was in Moorhead, that expect to see us talking about the CARES Act for the next 5 months. So I think that is a way of getting out in front of that, saying, yes, we're in the middle of a pandemic, but here's all the stuff I've been doing, probably and that may work to kind of undercut some of the argument of, well, he should be doing more, which is going to be, I'm sure, part of McGrath's argument, especially with things like the HEROES Act still sort of sitting kind of in limbo in Congress. It'll be interesting too if Senator McConnell does come through with another relief bill next month, or this month, I guess, since it's July.
Yeah, a little bit of news in there, folks. I mean, Morgan and I's story, Senator McConnell indicated, I think for the first time, there will be another bill. He called it the final bill, but he did sort of indicate, and again, one thing that McConnell is good at that I think Matt Bevin was terrible at, and why the Matt Bevin, Mitch McConnell comparison to me falls flat, is that Bevin was a pillar. He would never move, never accommodate, never. Mitch McConnell will look at the political winds and see it shift that way, and he will turn into an FDR Democrat overnight.
That's what he ran as in 2008. In 2008, he ran as the pork barrel king. He was going to bring all the projects to Kentucky, and then in 2014, he changed to Tea Party Mitch.
Defender against Obama.
Yeah. So he's always been a chameleon from the time that he was, a kind of a liberal to moderate Republican in Louisville in the 1970s.
And folks, Morgan has a great story. Morgan, you did a great story on that sort of changing shift. The one consistent that McConnell has had, before we switch gears here, is that he's always emphasized power. From his very first, I think your story, Morgan, revealed how in his freshman year as a member of the Senate, his freshman term, he was already talking about this position that I'm going to have with President Reagan and look at what I can do for you, Kentucky. Joe, let me ask you, we now that we have the mail-in vote numbers in, and we're looking at, 1 million or so folks who voted, I think the conversation now switches to Senator McConnell. Do you favor mail-in voting? Because Republicans are at least talking at both sides of their mouth as a party. You got State Senator Damon Thayer saying, let's go back to the old system. Let's go back to what he hashtag it. Normal in November was the hashtag that he used. And then former WHS political reporter Joe Arnold sort of backing him up, saying, yeah, I'm really worried about the security of mail-in voting. It's just rot for vote buying. However, Secretary of State Michael Adams saying to us, everything was fine. It was an election. It was free of fraud, right? This is a McConnell acolyte or Republican saying no problems here. So what are we gonna? I mean, it sounds like Republicans aren't on the same page when it comes to voting.
I think normal in November, in Mitch speak, kind of means like I win by 15 points like McGrath. I win like the Lunsford race. Like this is the model that I've been basing all of my campaign on. If it's normal and we're voting the same way, then I'm assured victory. If you change that up and you have a different electorate voting, and you have record turnout in a general election, not just a primary, but a general election, because everyone can mail in their ballot and it's easier than ever to vote. Plus you have the new voters who have been newly enfranchised by Governor Bashir's executive order. That completely changes the landscape, and that's the same kind of mystery factor where you don't know what's going to happen. Just like a lot of people said Charles Booker would be the mystery factor if he ran against Mitch, because he'd never run against him. So I think there will be a lot of pressure for Secretary Adams to not go along with the same type of voting general election as we saw in the primary election. I think we will learn a lot about Secretary Adams in terms of how he responds to that pressure, because I think he clearly felt that Kentucky did a great job in this primary election.
Yeah, and because here's the part, Adams is in an awkward position. He's getting a lot of good press off of this. I mean, he's getting a lot of praise both within the state and outside of the state from everyone. And a general election includes independents. This will not.
The Republican base doesn't care about the media. They don't like the media, so they don't care if the media is praising you. I'm sure there are a lot of Republicans who hate mail-in voting, and they would let him know, and probably are letting him know, that
including President Trump,
for this, they don't like it.
Yeah, but I think for Adams, you're in this weird position where you're probably the second most popular state constitutional officer now, where you've gotten this sort of bipartisan praise. You did get some backlash. He did get some backlash within his own party for doing this, obviously. And he has spoken to that. But there is, I think, he's getting some personal. Now, he says that he's going to look and watch to see how COVID-19 is doing. He didn't really give us a benchmark for what that means in Kentucky, like a certain number of cases we were seeing or not plateauing. I think what it also means is that he's waiting for some sort of cue from McConnell as well. I mean, that he has to be thinking of, what does the senator think here about this and how much that plays into a role. But I certainly think that Michael Adams got a lot of credit as a statesman of doing the right thing above partisanship, above ideology. And I think he wants maybe to continue. Because remember, his slogan last year was easier to vote, harder to cheat. Well, by his own admission, there was no fraud or mass cheating involved in the mail-in vote.
I think that'll be really key. The fact that his big issue has been, I really don't want to see, I want to prevent voter fraud. And now, yeah, we have a track record and him saying, okay, we were able to do this without fraud issues. So yeah, I think that does kind of, make it harder to backtrack because of that. One thing I do think that we'll see is a push for more polling locations in November. And in particular, I think Booker, that was obviously an issue he talked about a lot. And he kind of mentioned in his concession statement yesterday that, that was something, ensuring a fair kind of well-run elections is going to be something he pushes for. And I have seen some people too. One of the reasons we didn't have as many polling locations was because of concern for state officials had for poll workers who volunteer, who tend to be, older and thus more vulnerable to the virus. So it wouldn't surprise me to see maybe either from state officials or even at the grassroots level, kind of a push to try to get younger people who don't have other health conditions that make them more vulnerable to the virus, trying to get more of those people out to say, hey, I'll volunteer and work the polls so that we can have more, polls open.
McConnell and a good part of your base are older people, and McConnell is on team mask. He is saying, like, let's not stigmatize this. Would he also sort of be in favor of mail-in voting, because putting his voters at risk? And I think also the thing that they are thinking about is clearly Amy McGrath was able to eke out this victory against Charles Booker because she, sort of like everyone was stockpiling on toilet paper and hand sanitizer, she stockpiled those mail-in voters early. She had an operation that knew how to specifically target those folks. She sent them mailers telling them and teaching them how to do mail-in ballots. She had videos, like going through it step by step. So she knows what she's doing when it comes to the mail-in system. She was ahead of the curve on Charles Booker on that, right? And that's probably why she ended up beating him by the margin that she did. So to me, it says Amy McGrath has to be considered the better of the two at mail-in voting, right? I mean, because we've never done it before, and she did it, and she did it effectively, keeping off this hurricane coming from Charles Booker.
Yeah, all of her mailers, or not all of her mailers, but a lot of her mailers were large mailers, like 8 by 11, and the front of them and the back of them were the instructions on here's where you go to get your mail-in ballot. Once you get your mail-in ballot, you sign here, you sign there, you do this and that gets counted. And I think that was clearly something that you didn't see a lot of from the Booker campaign. One, because they couldn't afford it because they didn't have $40 million like
Right.
and secondly, it didn't seem to be as much of an emphasis, at least through their mailers.
And also on the you mentioned older voters, older Republican voters who would be, reliable kind of turnout for McConnell. I think that mail-in, you run into kind of a similar question of, okay, I think the assumption that left voters are going to be the ones taking advantage of that is questionable, only because with the virus, assuming that it's still prevalent the way it is right now, I mean, I would expect to see some people, especially older people who know who are more vulnerable to the virus, if their only option is to go to a poll. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised for them to say, well, it's not worth it. I'm too scared to go to a polling place where I run into people, for people who are taking it seriously.
That's the part about Adams, telling us and having this yardstick of I'm going to monitor the virus. Fine, but human beings are involved, and human consciousness and basic anxiety is involved. So even if the numbers are going down, this is the same thing with the economy and the restaurant people, which is there's just a segment of the population that does not feel comfortable, right? If there's too many people at your restaurant, if your restaurant is doing too well, it's like, I'm not going in there, there's too many people in there, right? Like, so even if the virus begins to take a turn or a dip in the number of cases or the number of deaths in Kentucky, let's just leave out the rest of the country, that doesn't mean that people feel comfortable coming out, including your people, including people who are going to vote for Mitch McConnell. They might not feel comfortable. Now, there might be, Joe, more bravado on the right to be like, screw that, I'm going out there anyway, mask or not. But I still think that there's a worry of, ooh, are these people going to show up? Let me add one thing I heard, you guys, from people I spoke to, like I said, who used to be pretty close to McConnell, and others in the Republican circles here in Kentucky. One thing that they do admit privately, and even if the McConnell campaign won't admit it publicly, is the suburban sort of shift going on here. There is a concern about like Oldham County, right? Like the map has gotten wider. Is that true, Joe? Like, what do you think? I mean, we saw that the Democrats flipped that one state Senate seat. Are Kentucky suburbs now at play here for Democrats?
Well, they have been since Trump. Since 2016, you see the suburbs in eastern Jefferson County going overwhelmingly Democrat. You saw that in 2018 when Yarmouth and Congressman Yarmouth and Mayor Fisher overwhelmingly won particularly the northeastern suburbs of Jefferson County, and you saw that with Andy Beshear in 2019. He absolutely clobbered Devin in eastern Jefferson County and parts of Oldham County too. And you saw that last week in the special election for District 26 in the state Senate, where Karen Berg, who came really close to beating Ernie Harris, who had been an incumbent for a long time there, Republican incumbent. She came with about 5 votes, 5%, 5 percentage points short of beating Harris in that race. She runs again in the special election. Blowout. Berg won by around 14 percentage points over the Republican in that race. So they're just a question of, it's suburbs right outside of urban areas certainly seem to be trending blue. The question is, are there enough of them in Kentucky? Because there are a lot more strictly rural areas throughout the rest of the state than there are, eastern suburbs of Jefferson County. There's a lot more people out there.
Right. I guess let's wrap this up here on the election. To me, the lesson of this race is that Kentucky is looking to experiment, right? We're looking to sort of do things maybe a bit differently, given the fact that we're in the middle of this pandemic. and it's creating some very interesting political allies. I think, for example, the person arguing against the mail-in system was Charles Booker. In his statement at the end there, he was oddly, he was sort of making this argument of, oh, this is, there are still people who are checking their absentee ballot who don't even know if they did vote, if their vote was counted. I mean, I'm already hearing from his folks on social media these wild, sort of unproven, but concerns about, oh, my vote wasn't counted. What about these disqualified votes? First, let's get to the facts of things to educate people. Joe, what about this thing of, we saw 185,000 votes coming out of Jefferson County, and now that number's dipped. Explain to people before you all go on social media. I know this is probably gonna be posted on social media. Before you listen to someone who isn't here, please listen to our Pulitzer Prize winning Joe Sonka on the basic facts of what is going on. Joe, why are we seeing the difference in numbers?
Well, first of all, I would love to hear more details on this. I know some information, but I would love to know more details from the Jefferson County Clerk on this, because there were a little less than 6,000 less absentee mail-in votes counted than there were received. And the spokesperson for the county clerk's office told me yesterday is, look, a lot of these ballots just did not have a signature on it, on the envelope, and by law, if it says right there in instructions, if you do not sign it, we can't count the vote legally. So he said that there were a lot of votes that did not have a signature. Some didn't fill out anything in the ballots, and because of that, they were legally required to not count those votes.
So real quick, so
even if 100% of those ballots were Democrats who voted for Booker, he still loses the race by 9,000 votes. But I would like to have more detail on specifically how many were thrown out, specifically how many were thrown out for not having signature A, how many not for having signature B. That's still information that I do not have, and I think everybody deserves to have. But that's why that total was less.
So to be clear, some of these these absentee ballots weren't counted because the people didn't sign on the outside of the envelope as per the instructions. But some weren't counted because they did sign on the outside of the envelope, and you open up and they didn't vote for anyone.
Yes. He said he did not give me a number, which I asked for a number on which different reasons why ballots were not counted. But he said that there were many that did not fill out anything.
That's interesting, because I know in my conversation with Secretary of State Adams, he did admit how, particularly on the Republican side, there were people who just, there were no real races they were interested in, and they got these ballots back, and nobody filled out anything. So of those six, and this is why it's important, folks, to listen to people who are actually doing the work. So those 6,000 votes, what we're trying to get answers for you now, because sometimes, again, we have the same questions that people in the public do. And we don't, going to just throw out these theories on social media in a meme about what they are. We're actually going to ask the questions and try to dig in and investigate. So you're saying, Joe, that there are some of these 6,000 where it seems like they weren't filled out properly because they didn't have a signature, and some that were, but nobody voted for anyone. And we don't know how many of those are Democrats. We don't know how many of those are Republicans. So it's not like Charles Booker got 6,000 votes taken away.
Very unlikely, and that is from the spokesperson for the Jefferson County Clerk's office, what they told me yesterday, and we're definitely going to be following up on specifics on specifically how many were thrown out and what the reasons were for them.
So we're still digging in, folks. So please stay informed. I beg of thee, stay informed.
Don't make Philip go another Twitter rant.
Please don't, folks. Again, I'm Philip M. Bailey, political writer here at the Courier Journal, along with my colleagues Joe Sonka and Morgan Watkins. Guys, any final thoughts on this election as we sort of now look forward to the general? Any thoughts, advice, or questions you have coming out of this? I know, Joe, we just talked about the issue with the 6,000 ballots. Morgan, is there anything that is unanswered for you that you want to see? I know you and I talked. The thing I want to learn is this: where did those mail-in ballots come from? What parts of, particularly in Jefferson County, where did they come from, and when were they received?
Yeah, I mean, I think especially because the November election and where the pandemic is still very much a question in play, that anything that we can find out about how the process actually worked here in Kentucky, the first time we ever tried it, and right, who used what method. I think that that'll be really interesting and useful for people. Other than that, I think it's just, you know, for voters, I think even with how passionate this primary was, and you did have, you know, Charles Booker got a lot of people who cared about him as a candidate apart from the whole beating McConnell question. But I think now, I think you still end up seeing, you know, a lot of people turning, saying, okay, it's time for the fall races. And I think you'll just see kind of, you know, that usual speed up.
I'm different. You know, mail-in voting tends to skew towards affluent, educated people. I'm interested to know if, for example, people in the West End participated in the usual way that they do via mail-in or not. Was there a cutoff there? Again, folks, thanks for joining us. I'm Philip M. Bailey, political writer at the Courier Journal, here along with Joe Sonka and Morgan Watkins. Please stay tuned. Please subscribe, and please, for the love of God, stay informed.